Today's theme is jumping off the shoulders of giants, which sounds like a particularly weird, dangerous sport. But in terms of the giant that I have picked, intellectual hero, if you like, I thought there was absolutely no point in coming into a room like this and advertising somebody who will go with a smooth, soft, tepid consensus of the room, walk with a general consensus of ideas in Cambridge or in the country. And so this being a relatively youthful organisation, and this being a technology event, and this being by and large a liberal institution, I thought I would champion a man who is a profoundly reactionary Kentucky tobacco farmer called Wendell Berry, who I would argue is the most important political thinker most of you have never heard of, and who is finally available in print in Britain for the first time in his 80 years. And I'm going to advertise the merits of Wendell Berry today. Before I do that, I want to talk about another thinker and another issue, because I want to put Wendell Berry, my hero, in the context of the here and now. And the here and now, as far as we in politics are concerned, is the aftermath of the Brexit vote. And there are lots of parallels, of course, with what's going on in France and Trump's America and so on. But in specific terms, what happened with the Brexit referendum was the biggest single democratic revolt against things as they are, against the establishment, if you like, the liberal elite, that has happened since the Second World War. And I would suggest to you that it is a political and even a moral duty for all of us to try to understand why what happened happened and to adjust our thinking and our behaviour accordingly. Now, there's going to be a very, very unpopular book published quite soon by a man called David Goodhart. It's called The Road to Somewhere, and it's his idea about why Brexit happened, and it has a lot of merit. And basically, he divides the world, or Britain, into two groups of people who he calls the somewheres and the anywheres. The anywheres are most of you. They are the highly educated, liberal elite of the country. They're the people who feel that they could be global citizens, who have a looser connection to national identity and morality and community. And the somewheres are, if you like, the left behind people in the small towns and the industrial towns and the villages and the fishing towns up and down the country, who first and foremost identify with their communities and their areas. They say, I'm a Cornish fisherman's wife, or I'm a Dundonian, or whatever it might be. And they tend to have more socially conservative views, and they tend to be more patriotic, and they tend to be more religious than the anywheres. That's the division that he makes. And it's an important division for what I'm going to talk about Wendell Berry, because Wendell Berry, in many ways, is standing up for the American somewheres, the original people of America, the original farmers, the smaller communities. I guess most of us in this room have at least one thing in common. Not everybody, but most of you will have come at the beginning of your lives from a community which will have been identifiably traditional in some way. It might have been anywhere around the world. It might have been a farming village. It might have been an industrial town. It might have been a long-settled suburb. But you come from somewhere. And I suggest to you that as a result of coming to Cambridge University, you are not likely to go back to where you came from the rest of your life. You are on the move. And in many ways, that's where the Wendell Berry story starts. He was a very, very clever young boy from a traditional village in Kentucky, in America. His people had farmed the same valley for 3 generations. They'd come there at about the time of the American Civil War and been there ever since. And a very, very bright boy. And he went to New York and started to become a writer. And he was moving in that very, very exciting, liberal New York intelligentsia world of the 1950s. And he was going places. He was going to become an academic. He was going to become a famous writer. And something very important happened to Wendell Berry. He went home. He decided, actually, I am rooted in the land. I am rooted in my community. That's where my true values are. And unlike most of us, he went back to where he came from. And from there, he developed into a farmer. He was somebody who has all his life made things with his hands. He doesn't like high technologies. He farms with horses, and he farms highly successfully in this small Kentucky valley. Now, that wouldn't be terribly interesting to most of us, except for the fact that Wendell Berry is the best writer of English political prose since George Orwell, who he much resembles. We don't know him very well in this country for various reasons, among them that he would not like to be published by big corporations, as he calls them. 20 years ago, I tried to persuade him to be published in the UK by Penguin, and he said he wouldn't be published here by Penguin because they were a ruthless, large corporation. And he liked to be published by small publishing houses up and down America. And if that meant that the British people couldn't read him, too bad. Somebody has finally, Paul Kingsnorth, a poet, has finally persuaded him to be published by Penguin in the UK, and so you can now read him here for the first time. He came back, and he became more and more concerned with what was happening to farming in America. Farming is a very unfashionable subject to be talking about, I guess, in a TED talk or at a university. But he starts with the subject of topsoil. Couldn't be blander or more duller subject than that. Topsoil, let me remind you, is what we all subsist on. Topsoil is a kind of mulch, a crumbling of little fragments of minerals, a huge amount of vegetable decaying matter, many, many microorganisms and bioorganisms of different kinds, rotting bones, rotting flesh. It is the soil on which all agriculture comes from. And it's very thin. It's about as deep, on average, around the world as from my hip bone to my ankle. That's about how thin it is. Without topsoil, we don't have proper farming. Without topsoil and good husbandry, we don't have food. Without topsoil, we don't have civilizations. Without topsoil, we don't have us. Everything depends upon topsoil. In Cambridge, we are surrounded by a great ocean of topsoil, which, like the topsoil around most of the rest of the industrialized world, is being flushed away year by year into the sea. If you stand on the coasts of England and you look out, most times of the year you will see a kind of strange, grimy rim of red or brown or yellow. And that is the soil from the surrounding farms being washed into the sea and lost forever because of bad husbandry, because of a lack of good fencing, drainage, and the traditional skills which for 5,000 years British farmers, like American farmers after them, understood. And that's now being lost by the industrialized farming spreading across the world. Once we lose topsoil, we lose absolutely everything, no more us. So it's a very good place to start. Wendell Berry's conviction is that good husbandry, good farming is the foundation of every good society. But it's not simply about biology or about farming as a practice, because it's also about the nature of the communities that nurture, understand, and look after the local, the areas they live in, the people around them. And that has made him a great defender of community against the big forces of modern America. He is a very strange thinker because he is, at one level, as I say, profoundly reactionary. He's a conservative, Christian, family thinker who believes in the virtues of the small town and knowing your neighbor and doing good by your neighbor and the importance of good friendship and good marriage alongside good work. But at the same time, he has been one of the most vehement and effective protesters against the American war machine, a very major protester against the Vietnam War. He's in full-throated opposition to what you might call modern American turbocharged capitalism. He doesn't believe that the scientific ways of farming are good for the land. He believes they poison the land and are destroying America's future. So he's a radical reactionary in the sort of spirit of Walt Whitman and Thoreau and biologists and thinkers going back to the previous centuries like Humboldt and to a certain extent Charles Darwin. He's in the tradition of radical ruralist thinking. His essays have extraordinary titles and they cover everything from English poetry to the nature of farm economics, to the problems of technology, to what he calls the world-consuming fire that we are about to see with global warming. In fact, his book is called The World-Ending Fire. He's not a terribly cheerful thinker at all times, but he is also a very vigorous thinker. He believes in the pleasures of eating, the pleasures of the flesh. He's not a puritanical thinker in any way. So he's this strange, as I say, he's now in his 80s, thin, thrawn, difficult, awkward, cussed American. He is, as I would argue, the most important single essayist that you don't know. I came across him by accident when I was quite young, and I was walking through a small Devon town, bored out of my mind, and I passed the bookshop, and there was a little book of essays in the window, and it had the title, What Are People For? And I thought, that's an interesting question. I've never heard that question posed before. Here is somebody different. And I went in and I bought it. And I was so entranced by the pure, limpid, tough, argumentative prose style that I have been trying to dig up his essays. And he's also a poet, very fine poet, and a novelist and a short story writer. Every time I go to America, I don't go to Trump meetings, I go to little bookshops and I pick up Wendell Berry books. And it's changed my life. I would like to say it's changed the way I live, because if there's one thing about an important thinker, it shouldn't just change the way you think, it should change the way you live. But I, like most people, am a bit of a hypocrite. I still drive up and down to Cambridge in a car from time to time. I try to use less electricity. I try to be more environmentally friendly. I try to think more carefully about what I eat, why I eat it, where it's come from, who made it, and how well they made it, and how well they have been looking after the landscape in which they make that food. I've tried to think about these things and adjust my life accordingly. But if you read Wendell Berry, and you read him attentively, and look at what he's saying, then I promise you, your lives will be changed for the better. And although you will still be, as it were, anywhere people, part of the liberal elite that have been trounced in the Brexit vote, I think you will have more understanding of the somewhere people, the communities from which you came and the communities which voted in overwhelming numbers against the way things are, because every referendum has only one real question, which is, are you a bit pissed off? And if you are a bit pissed off, you vote against the people in power, and that's what happened. And people are highly pissed off because of the economic circumstances and because they have been culturally left behind, ignored and spurned. They are the people, in many ways, for whom Wendell Berry speaks, which is why, although he's writing about American agriculture, he's such an important figure for us here and now. You will jump off the shoulders of a giant and land flat on your face, and good for you. Thank you very much.